This is TWiT.
Many people are obviously they're taking to the streets. They're making their voices heard right now. It's important to be sure that they can do this safely, both from a physical perspective as well as a digital perspective. It used to be that you could actually protest quite easily anonymously, for the most part, at least by comparison. Today, we all carry around a computer in our pocket, and that increases the complexity of this situation. That phone is broadcasting who we are, where we're going, where we came from, to anyone who happens to know how to pick up that information. And you want to protect yourself as far as that's concerned. So Nathan Sheard is lead organizer for the Electronic Frontier Foundation. And Nathan is joining us today to talk about how you can protect yourself in these demonstrations, and really appreciate your time. We love the work that the EFF is doing. Welcome to the show, Nathan.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Awesome. So good to get you here. So first of all, explain why it is so important to look at digital self-defense right now and kind of before leaving the house. This isn't something that you do like after the fact. There's a lot of work that needs to be done prior to even leaving to participate. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, first I would say that one of the key missions for Electronic Frontier Foundation is making sure that people have the freedom to assemble and to share their voice with folks without concern about government repression or warrantless surveillance. And so we stand really strongly behind the folks that are out in the streets that are engaging in exactly that activity. But we keep in mind also that one of the things that they're out there to call attention to are failures and disparities in the justice system. So it's important to make sure that we're also providing resources that meet that need and identify that sometimes we need real protections where legal protections are not sufficient. And so that's why having things like the surveillance self-defense guide that give people information on how things that they can do, and like you said, important things like think about before you even leave your home and like while you're there, and things to do in afterwards to protect and identify that the choices that you're making are privacy is a team sport. So the choices that you're making are not only about how you protect your own privacy and your own security, but also all the other folks that you're out there and standing in solidarity with.
Yeah, indeed. It's a great walkthrough, a whole lot of points highlighted in there, which we're going to talk about a few of those right now, but definitely people should check this out, EFF.org, and read it for yourself, especially if you plan on participating or you have been. This can be a way to kind of possibly enhance or correct kind of your actions going in so you can protect yourself. How important is, like I see on a lot of these lists, people are mentioning you want to have some sort of a secondary device or a burner device, not using your primary phone. And I can understand why, but explain a little bit how this actually protects someone to use a secondary device instead of their primary one.
Yeah, so frequently we'll go back to this fact is like for every person, it's going to be a different mixture around like balancing cost and convenience and security and privacy. And for some folks, they are going to make the decision that there's the information, the data that's on their normal day-to-day device is of such potential. There's such the threat of it falling into unintended hands, be it law enforcement or otherwise, is so sufficient that it's not safe for them to carry that device with them. And so in that case, a burner phone can be really helpful. And one of the things that we benefit from here in the United States, that's not the case around the world, is that currently federal regulation doesn't require you to show ID or to purchase a prepaid phone or a SIM card, although some state laws do differ there. And so if folks that do make that calculation to like not take their personal everyday device, but to get a prepaid phone or sometimes we call it a burner phone, it's important also to remember though that the location of mobile devices can be determined by cell phone towers, and so if you want to keep your ID, so if you're using that method to also kind of obscure your identity or make it more difficult for folks to identify where you've been on a day of action or during a protest, make sure that they're turning off their device, their location data before they leave their home, and not turning it back on till they return home, or if they're turning it off before they leave their home, and turn it back on at the action to make sure they're turning it off again before they go to any place that can be identified with them. That's going to kind of like reduce that level of anonymity that the burner phone is providing, and never keeping their burner phone and their normal phone in the same place where they might be, their locations could be correlated and potentially used to identify them in that way as well.
Right. And I've also read kind of the idea of leaving a primary device not only home, but on and home. That way it's registered there, right? And in the ways that you're talking about, location, all this kind of stuff, just as further protection. But again, making sure not to cross those wires is very important. Now, if they do have to, if someone does have to leave their house with their primary device, what are a few of the kind of mandatory, like, all right, you better be doing this at the very least, sort of actions that they should be taking on that device?
Yeah, and to build on the point that you just made about leaving your normal device at home, that's an important point. I'm glad that you brought up, because a lot of times when investigators or agencies would have are looking to identify what someone's movements, they are also looking for anomalies. And so if you've got your phone on every day normally, and then all of a sudden on this one particular day of action, your phone is all of a sudden off, that is going to raise a red flag. But to move to your question around the things that you can do if you are making the choice to take your normal device with you to an action. One thing that's important to do, and I actually would recommend this even if you weren't going to, a particular protest, is making sure that your device is you're using full disk encryption, so that the information that's on your data is securely protected. Luckily, iPhones and most of the more recent Androids all do this by default. But making sure that, especially particularly if you have an older phone, that you are going through the steps that you would need to protect your device in that way. Turning off Face ID and fingerprint locking is another really good one. It's super convenient. I use the Face ID on normal days, but certainly when I'm on a day, when I'm somewhere where I might be more likely to engage with law enforcement, so whether that be crossing a border or participating in a protest, even though again it's a First Amendment protected activity, I would recommend turning off your Face ID or your fingerprint unlock. The law is still there's still kind of in flux around the kind of protections that you have and being compelled to open your device using biometric data, where it's much more firmly and kind of really in place and has right now less arguable risks involved with using a passcode that you remember, and especially a passcode that's strong, like an 8 digits or more, to be able to open your device, to make so that way you're making sure that data that you're using, that full disk encryption, and it's securely protected against brute force attacks that might be otherwise susceptible to. And using Signal or some other type of end-to-end encrypted communication device format, rather, SMS texts, regular text messages that people send are sent in clear text and can be potentially compromised either by the use of cell site simulators or simply because of cooperation, compelled or otherwise, between your service provider and law enforcement and accessing that information. And so using something like Signal, where even if that information is accessed, even if the data is intercepted, it's going to be in a way that's not readable by anyone. And again, thinking about the fact that you may not have things that your communication that you're particularly concerned about, but you're making choices for everyone else that you communicate with. And so taking the proactive step of sharing and also making sure that other folks that you are communicating with are using those types of encrypted communications is important. And luckily also, we're talking about having these passcodes that are 8 digits or more, so that can be really difficult if you're in a space where you see something that you really think it's important to be filming or taping. Having to type that in every time is going to be kind of a deterrent or make it more difficult for you. iPhones and a lot of the newer Androids do allow you to take photos or video without unlocking your device, which is also going to be more safe if your device should be taken from you or should fall. At least all of the other information that is on that device won't be accessible other than the ability to take photos. And so with an iPhone, you can do that by holding on to firmly pressing on the camera icon, or with an Android. Some of the newer ones I know, like double pressing the power button, often will do that. So making sure before you leave the house that you understand that you're familiar with how to do that on your device is going to be pretty critical. And being mindful of, if you're taking photos, being mindful of the people that are in those photos, and not, trying to not. I would suggest not taking photos that show identifiable traits, people's faces or tattoos or unique colored hair or clothing. But there are apps like ObscureCam by the Guardian Project or Image Scrubber that's available both on iOS and Android that can help you after the fact to be able to obscure images and remove metadata that could potentially put folks at risk. And finally, I would also recommend like using airplane mode on your phone and to prevent, as another way of preventing the location tracking. And so there are some apps that will allow you to use navigation without having network access. And since GPS itself is actually, there is just a receive only system, that is, so if you have an app that uses GPS to help you navigate, provided that you've already downloaded beforehand the maps that would need to be able to be in place to work with that could be helpful. But also keep in mind that even though GPS is receive only, if your phone, so some devices will store location data. So making sure that you again having it being fully encrypted and if necessarily erasing that data after the fact, so it's not a potential risk to you or other folks that you care about.
Man, that is a good list. Very thorough. And, folks, like I said, definitely go to EFF.org, search out this kind of run through because there's a lot of information there. And, I'm seeing actually a lot of this being shared today, which is and for the past couple of days, which is great because this is important information. A lot of people might not consider this. It's just like I want to participate. I want to make my voice heard. They're not necessarily thinking about how that computer that's in their pocket could potentially be used against them.